When I returned to school after summer vacation, everything felt the same, except for one thing. There was a new wing in the school, a hallway that had been under construction for years and was finally finished. The students were excited to explore it, and I was no different. It was said to be state-of-the-art, with modern classrooms and facilities. But no one talked about the strange feeling you got when you walked down that hallway. The first time I went there, I was with a group of friends. We were just curious, wanting to see what the fuss was about. The hallway was bright and clean, with freshly painted walls and new lockers. But as we walked further down, I noticed something odd. The further we went, the quieter it got. It wasn't just the normal quiet of an empty hallway. It was an unnatural silence, like the sound had been sucked out of the air. We laughed it off, teasing each other about being scared, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When we reached the end of the hallway, there was a door. It was different from the others, old and wooden, with a brass handle that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. One of my friends dared me to open it, and not wanting to seem like a coward, I did. The door creaked open, revealing a small, empty room. There was nothing inside except dust and cobwebs, but as soon as I stepped in, I heard it. A faint whispering, like someone was standing right behind me, murmuring in my ear. I whipped around, but there was no one there. My friends were still outside the door, laughing and joking, but I could barely hear them over the whispers. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. It was like 100 voices all talking at once, in a language I didn't understand. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I backed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. "What's wrong?" one of my friends asked, noticing the look on my face. "Didn't you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Hear what?" they replied, looking confused. I realized then that I was the only one who had heard the whispers. I tried to laugh it off, saying it was probably just the wind or something, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that room. I avoided the new hallway, taking the long way around the school just to stay away from it. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to draw me back. Every time I passed by, I felt a strange pull, like something was calling me. One afternoon, I couldn't resist any longer. I waited until after school, when everyone had gone home, and made my way to the hallway. The school was quiet and the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the windows. As I walked down the hallway, the silence grew thicker, almost suffocating. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the handle, and for a moment I thought about turning back. But something pushed me forward, a compulsion I couldn't resist. I opened the door and stepped inside. The whispers started immediately, louder this time, and more frantic. The room was freezing, and I could see my breath in the air. The whispers seemed to be coming from all around me, circling me, closing in. My head started to spin, and I felt dizzy, like I was being pulled into the ground. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, and I could finally make out some of the words. "Help us," they said. "We're trapped." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew I needed to get out of there. I ran out of the room, slamming the door behind me, and didn't stop until I was outside the school. The next day, I went to the principal and asked about the new hallway. He looked at me strangely and said there wasn't any new construction. The hallway had always been there, he said, though it had been closed off for years after an accident during its construction. I didn't press him for details, but I knew there was more to the story. I never went back to that hallway, and I warned my friends to stay away from it too. But every now and then, I hear rumors, students talking about hearing strange whispers or seeing doors open on their own. And sometimes late at night, when the school is empty and the halls are quiet, I swear I can still hear those voices, calling out for help, trapped forever in that haunted hallway.
After the summer break, everyone was talking about the new teacher in our school. Mr. Jacobs was his name, and he was assigned to teach history. From the moment he stepped into the classroom, something about him felt off. He was tall, with a stern face and eyes that seemed to bore into you when he looked your way. But what really caught my attention was the way he moved, so silently, like he was gliding rather than walking. The first few days of his class were normal enough. He had a strict, no-nonsense approach, and the room was always dead silent when he taught. But as the days went on, strange things started to happen. It began with the rumours. Some students claimed they'd seen Mr. Jacobs walking the hallways late at night, long after school was closed. Others said they heard voices coming from his classroom when no one was supposed to be there. One day after school, I stayed late to finish a project in the library. As I was packing up to leave, I realised I'd forgotten my history book in the classroom. The school was almost deserted by then, and the only sound was the distant hum of the janitor's vacuum. I headed towards Mr. Jacobs' classroom, feeling a bit uneasy as I walked through the dimly lit hallways. When I reached the classroom, the door was slightly ajar, and I could see that the lights were off. As I pushed the door open, the first thing I noticed was the cold, an unnatural chill that seemed to seep into my bones. The room was dark, except for a faint, flickering light coming from the corner. I stepped inside, and that's when I saw him. Mr. Jacobs was standing at the front of the classroom facing the blackboard. He was muttering something under his breath, too quiet for me to hear. But what really freaked me out was the flickering light. It wasn't coming from a lamp or the hallway. It was coming from Mr. Jacobs himself. His figure seemed to shimmer and waver, like he was barely there, like a projection on a faulty screen. I froze, unsure of what to do. That's when he turned around and looked straight at me. His eyes were hollow, almost empty, and his face was pale, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with those lifeless eyes. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and pointed towards the door, as if telling me to leave. I didn't need any more encouragement. I bolted out of the classroom and ran down the hallway, not stopping until I was outside the school. My heart was racing, and I could barely catch my breath. I told my friends what I saw, but they laughed it off, saying I was imagining things. But I knew what I saw. Something wasn't right with Mr. Jacobs. The next day, I went to class as usual, but Mr. Jacobs wasn't there. Instead, the principal came in and announced that Mr. Jacobs had resigned suddenly and wouldn't be coming back. The principal seemed uneasy, and when I asked him what had happened, he just shook his head and told me not to worry about it. But I couldn't stop thinking about that night. I started doing some digging, asking around town about Mr. Jacobs. That's when I learned the truth. Mr. Jacobs wasn't new to our school. He had taught there years ago, but he had died in a car accident on his way home one night. The thing is, no one knew why or how he had returned to teach again. To this day, I still get chills whenever I pass by that classroom. It's been years since Mr. Jacobs disappeared, but sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear his voice echoing through the empty halls. And every now and then, I catch a glimpse of a flickering light, just out of the corner of my eye, like a shadow that's almost, but not quite, there. As summer vacation ended, I was excited to go back to school and see my friends again. The first day back was always a mix of catching up with everyone and getting used to the routine again. But this year, something strange happened that I'll never forget. It started when I was assigned a new locker. It was one of those old, dented ones at the end of a dim hallway that no one liked to use. At first, I didn't think much of it, just a place to stash my books and gym clothes. But from the moment I opened it, something felt off. The locker door creaked open with a loud, rusty groan, and there was a faint, musty smell inside, like it hadn't been used in years. On the second day of school, I noticed something strange. As I put my books away, I found an old, yellowed piece of paper crumpled at the bottom of the locker. It looked like it had been there for a long time. I unfolded it and saw that it was a note, written in shaky, almost frantic handwriting. It read, "Beware of locker 313. Do not open it after dark." A chill ran down my spine. My locker was number 312, right next to the one mentioned in the note. I laughed it off, thinking it was just some prank by a previous student, but the warning stuck with me. That evening, after soccer practice, I realised I'd left my homework in my locker. The school was almost empty by then, and the hallways were eerily quiet as I made my way to the locker. The lights in the hallway flickered, and the air felt heavy, almost oppressive. When I reached my locker, I noticed something strange. Locker 313, the one mentioned in the note, was slightly open. The door was ajar, and there was a dark, shadowy gap between the door and the frame. My curiosity got the better of me, and I hesitantly reached out to open it. As soon as I touched the door, a cold breeze seemed to emanate from inside, chilling me to the bone. I pulled the door open, and inside, I saw something that made my heart stop. There, crumpled at the bottom of the locker, was an old, dusty school uniform, stained with something dark, something that looked like dried blood. Before I could react, the lights in the hallway went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, using the flashlight to see. As I shone the light into locker 313, I saw movement, something shifting in the shadows at the back of the locker. Then, suddenly, a hand shot out, pale and thin, with long bony fingers. It grabbed my wrist with a grip like ice. I screamed and yanked my arm back, slamming the locker door shut. The lights flickered back on, and I stumbled backward, breathing heavily. The hallway was empty, silent except for the pounding of my heart in my ears. I didn't stick around to find out what was inside locker 313. I grabbed my homework from my own locker and ran out of the school as fast as I could. The next day, I asked the janitor about the locker, but he just shook his head and told me to stay away from it. He said it had been sealed shut for years, after a student went missing under mysterious circumstances. From that day on, I made sure to avoid that part of the hallway. Even now, I sometimes hear strange noises coming from locker 313, like whispers or scratching sounds. I'll never forget what I saw that night, and I always wonder who or what might still be lurking inside that locker, waiting for the next unlucky student to come too close. After summer vacation, returning to school always felt a bit surreal, like stepping back into a different world. This year, though, it was even more unsettling. There were whispers among the students about something strange happening in the school gym. No one could pinpoint exactly what it was, but everyone agreed that the place felt different, like it was hiding a dark secret. I didn't pay much attention to the rumours at first. The gym had always been a bit creepy, with its high ceilings and echoing silence when it was empty, but nothing out of the ordinary. That all changed one afternoon, when I stayed late after school to practice for the upcoming basketball game. The gym was deserted. The only sounds were the squeak of my sneakers on the polished floor and the steady thud of the basketball as I dribbled. I was so focused on my practice that I didn't notice the temperature dropping until I stopped for a break. Suddenly the gym felt freezing, as if someone had turned on the air conditioning full blast even though it was a warm day outside. I brushed it off and went to grab my water bottle from the bench. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing at the far end of the gym, near the old storage room. It was a girl, dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned gym uniform. Her hair was long and dark, obscuring her face. She was just standing there, perfectly still. "Hey," I called out, thinking it was another student, but she didn't respond. She didn't move at all. I started to walk toward her, but as I did, the lights in the gym flickered and then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. My heart skipped a beat, and I stopped in my tracks. The only light came from the small windows high up on the walls, casting eerie, pale beams across the floor. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice echoing off the walls. Still no response. I fumbled for my phone to use the flashlight, but when I looked up again, the girl was gone. The gym was empty, the silence almost deafening. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. I decided to leave, grabbing my stuff and heading for the door. As I reached the exit, I heard it. A faint, distant sound like someone crying. It was coming from the storage room. My curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I walked towards the sound. The door to the storage room was slightly ajar, and as I approached, the crying grew louder. I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. Inside, the room was pitch black, and the crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. I shone my phone's flashlight into the room, and my blood ran cold. There, in the corner, was the same girl I'd seen before. She was crouched down, her face hidden in her hands. Her uniform was torn and dirty, and she was rocking back and forth. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. Slowly, she lifted her head, and I nearly dropped my phone in shock. Her eyes were hollow, empty sockets, and her face was pale, almost translucent. She stared at me, her mouth moving as if she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then, without warning, she lunged toward me, her mouth opening wide in a silent scream. I stumbled backward, dropping my phone as I scrambled to get away. The light flickered wildly as it hit the floor, casting terrifying shadows on the walls. I didn't stop to look back. I ran out of the gym as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. The next day, I couldn't shake the image of that girl from my mind. I asked around trying to find out if anyone else had seen her, but no one knew what I was talking about. Eventually, I went to the school counselor and told her everything. She listened quietly and then told me something that made my blood run cold. Years ago, there had been a tragic accident during a gym class. A girl had died after a freak fall in the storage room, and since then there had been reports of strange sightings in the gym, of a girl crying, of lights flickering, of cold spots that couldn't be explained. I never went back to the gym alone after that, and every time we had practice, I kept an eye on the storage room door. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw her standing there, watching, waiting. I'll never forget the terror I felt that day, and I can't help but wonder if she's still there, trapped in the place where her life ended, waiting for someone to notice her.